The scream that cut through the late afternoon air sent a flock of crows scattering from their perch on a dead mesquite tree. And Gabriel Anderson dropped the rope he'd been coiling faster than a rattlesnake could strike. He spun toward the sound, his hand instinctively moving to the colt at his hip before his eyes registered what was happening. A woman, not more than 30 yards from where he stood near the riverbed outside San Antonio, Texas, was sinking into a patch of quicksand that had formed after the recent rains. The Rio Grande had been swollen for weeks in the summer of 1878, and the lowlands were treacherous with hidden pockets of saturated sand that could swallow a person whole. Gabriel didn't think. He just moved, his boots pounding against the hard, packed earth as he raced toward her. She was already knee-deep, her arms flailing as she tried to find purchase on something solid. The more she struggled, the deeper she sank, and he could see the panic in her eyes even from a distance. "Stop moving," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years working cattle across dangerous terrain. "You hear me? Stop struggling." The woman's head snapped toward him, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. For a moment she froze, her chest heaving with terrified breaths. That was good. That gave him time to assess the situation. The quicksand patch was maybe 6 feet across, but it was positioned in a low spot where water had pooled and drained multiple times, making it particularly unstable. He couldn't just wade in after her or they'd both be trapped. Gabriel's mind raced through his options. His horse, Copper, was tethered near his camp about 50 yards back. Too far. The rope he'd been working with was standard length, maybe 20 feet, not long enough to throw and maintain a safe distance. His eyes scanned the area and landed on a fallen cottonwood branch, thick enough to support weight but light enough to maneuver. "I'm going to get you out," he called to her, already moving toward the branch. "But you need to stay as still as possible. Lean back if you can, spread out your weight." "I can't." Her voice cracked with fear, and he could hear the cultured accent beneath the panic. "She wasn't from around here. I'm sinking." "You're sinking because you're fighting it." Gabriel dragged the branch toward the quicksand, testing its weight. "It would have to do. Listen to me." "My name's Gabriel. What's yours?" "Adelaide." The name came out in gasps. "Adelaide Sterling." "All right, Adelaide, I need you to trust me." He positioned himself at the edge of the quicksand, testing the ground with each step. The earth felt solid beneath his boots, but he knew better than to assume. "I'm going to push this branch out to you. When it gets close enough, grab hold of it. Don't pull on it, just hold it." "Understand," she nodded, her face pale beneath the coating of sweat and dirt. She'd sunk to her thighs now, and Gabriel knew they were running out of time. Once the sand reached her waist, the suction would make it exponentially harder to extract her. He extended the branch slowly, carefully, testing the stability of the ground with each inch he advanced. His own weight distributed across his feet, ready to throw himself backward if he felt the earth beginning to give way. The end of the branch reached her, and Adelaide grabbed it with both hands, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. "Good," Gabriel said, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Now I'm going to pull, but I need you to work with me. Small movements. We're going to rock you back and forth a little, break the suction. Can you do that?" "I think so." Her voice was steadier now, though he could still see the fear in her eyes. They were striking eyes, he noticed despite the circumstances. A clear, determined gray that reminded him of storm clouds over the plains. Gabriel began to pull, gently at first, testing the resistance. The quicksand held her tight, reluctant to release its prey. He adjusted his grip on the branch and pulled harder, feeling the muscles in his back and shoulders strain with the effort. Adelaide moved, just slightly, and he felt the give as the sand's hold loosened fractionally. "That's it," he encouraged. Now lean back more. Try to get your legs parallel to the surface. It was agonizingly slow work. Every pull had to be measured, controlled. Too much force and the branch might snap or slip from her grasp. Too little and the sand would win. Sweat dripped down Gabriel's face, soaking through his shirt despite the late afternoon breeze. Adelaide's breathing came in harsh gasps, her arms trembling with the effort of holding on. Minutes stretched like hours. Inch by painful inch, Adelaide emerged from the quicksand's grip. First her hips, then her knees, and finally her feet broke free with a sucking sound that made them both exhale in relief. But they weren't safe yet. She was still too deep in the unstable ground, and Gabriel couldn't risk going in after her. "I'm going to keep pulling," he said. "Try to use your legs now. Push yourself toward me." Adelaide nodded, her jaw set with determination. She was a fighter, he'd give her that. Another woman might have dissolved into hysterics by now, but she was focused on survival. Together, they worked in tandem, Gabriel pulling steadily while Adelaide used what strength she had left to propel herself across the treacherous surface. When she finally reached solid ground, Gabriel dropped the branch and grabbed her arms, hauling her the last few feet to safety. They collapsed together on the hard earth, both breathing heavily. Adelaide's dress was ruined, covered in gray mud from chest to hem, her hair a wild tangle around her face. She was shaking, whether from fear or exhaustion Gabriel couldn't tell. "You're all right," he said, his hand still on her shoulder. "You're safe now." Adelaide looked up at him, and something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, perhaps, or gratitude so profound it transcended words. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she covered her face with her muddy hands. "I'm sorry," she managed between sobs. "I'm sorry, I thought I saw something. A bird, maybe, or I don't know what. I just wandered off the path, and then suddenly I was sinking and I couldn't, hey." Gabriel's voice was gentle but firm. He reached out and carefully pulled her hands away from her face. "You don't need to apologize. This country is dangerous if you don't know it. That's not your fault." She took a shuddering breath and nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, which only succeeded in smearing more mud across her cheeks. Despite everything, Gabriel found himself thinking she was beautiful. Not in the delicate, pampered way of the society ladies who sometimes pass through San Antonio, but in a way that suggested strength beneath the refined surface. "Can you stand?" he asked. Adelaide tested her legs, wincing. "I think so. Everything hurts." "That's normal. Your muscles just did a lot of work." Gabriel rose and offered her his hand. She took it and he pulled her to her feet. She swayed slightly and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "My camp's not far. You should rest, get cleaned up. I shouldn't impose." But even as she said it, Adelaide looked around, and Gabriel saw the moment she realized she had no idea where she was or how to get back to wherever she'd come from. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "San Antonio." "I was traveling with a wagon train, but we stopped to make camp and I thought I'd take a walk to stretch my legs. I didn't mean to go so far." She looked back toward the quicksand, her face paling. "If you hadn't been here, but I was." Gabriel kept his tone matter of fact. "Come on. You need water, and those clothes need to come off before the mud dries completely." Adelaide's eyes widened, and Gabriel realized how that sounded. "I mean, I have spare clothes in my pack. They'll be too big, but they're clean and dry. You can change while I'm not looking." He felt heat rise in his face, which was ridiculous. He was 26 years old and had been around women before, but something about Adelaide Sterling made him feel like a green kid again. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Thank you. I appreciate your, discretion." They made their way back to Gabriel's camp in silence. He'd been traveling alone for 3 days now, heading back to his family's ranch after delivering a herd of cattle to buyers in Corpus Christi. The journey had been profitable, and he was in no particular hurry to return. His younger brothers could handle things for a few more days, and the solitude gave him time to think about the future he was building. His camp was simple, but well organized. A bedroll near a carefully contained fire pit, his saddle and tack arranged neatly under a canvas shelter he'd strung between two trees. Copper, his chestnut gelding, lifted his head from grazing and nickered a greeting. Gabriel led Adelaide to a fallen log near the fire and gestured for her to sit. "Wait here. I'll get those clothes and some water." He rummaged through his saddlebags and pulled out a spare shirt and pair of trousers. They'd swim on her, but they were better than the mud-caked dress she wore. He also grabbed his canteen and a cloth. "Here." He handed her the bundle. "There's a spot behind those rocks where you'll have privacy. Take your time." Adelaide accepted the clothes with a grateful nod and disappeared behind the outcropping. Gabriel busied himself with building up the fire and setting water to boil. He had coffee and some dried beef in his pack, along with cornbread left over from this morning. It wasn't much, but it would do. When Adelaide emerged a few minutes later, Gabriel had to suppress a smile. His shirt hung off her shoulders, and she'd had to roll the sleeves up several times. The trousers were cinched at the waist with what looked like a strip torn from her petticoat, the legs pooling around her bare feet. She'd done her best to clean her face and hands, though streaks of mud still clung to her hairline. "I know I look ridiculous," she said, but there was a hint of humor in her voice now that the immediate danger had passed. "You look alive," Gabriel replied. "That's what matters. Sit down, coffee will be ready soon." Adelaide settled onto the log again, this time with more care, as if testing whether her body would cooperate. Gabriel poured water from his canteen into a tin cup and handed it to her. She drank deeply, then paused. "You must think I'm terribly foolish," she said quietly, "wandering off like that. I think you're from somewhere that doesn't have quicksand." Gabriel sat down across from her, his elbows resting on his knees. "Everyone makes mistakes in unfamiliar territory. The important thing is you survived. Thanks to you." She met his eyes over the rim of the cup. "I didn't properly thank you. You saved my life." Gabriel shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't have." Adelaide's voice was firm. "I know that. I've been traveling west for 6 weeks now, and I've seen exactly how much people are willing to do for strangers. Which is to say, very little. You risked your own safety for someone you didn't know. That means something." The coffee began to boil, giving Gabriel an excuse to look away from the intensity of her gaze. He wrapped his hand in a cloth and moved the pot away from the direct heat, then poured 2 cups. "Where are you from?" he asked, steering the conversation to safer ground. "Originally, I mean." "Boston." Adelaide wrapped her hands around the warm cup, even though the evening air was still hot. "My father was a banker. He passed away 2 years ago, and my mother followed him 6 months later. I have no siblings, no close family, just a very large house that felt emptier every day." She paused, staring into the fire. "A friend wrote to me about opportunities in San Antonio, teaching positions," she said, "a chance to start fresh. That's a long way to come on your own." I wasn't entirely alone. The wagon train had 15 families, but yes, it's been quite a journey. She took a sip of the coffee and made a face. Gabriel almost laughed. "Too strong. It's certainly different from what I'm used to." But she took another sip anyway. "What about you? Are you from San Antonio, born and raised?" "My family has a ranch about 20 miles northeast of town." "The Broken A. We run cattle mostly, though my father dabbled in horse breeding before he died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss." Gabriel nodded his acknowledgement. My mother's still alive, still running the place with an iron fist, and I have 3 younger brothers. Well, 2 younger. Marcus is only a year behind me. Then there's James and Thomas. That must be nice, having family close by. There was a wistfulness in Adelaide's voice that made Gabriel's chest tighten. They fell into an easy conversation as the sun sank lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Adelaide told him about Boston, about the society parties she'd attended and the expectations that had weighed on her like chains. She spoke of her love for teaching, how she'd volunteered at a school in the poor district against her mother's wishes. Gabriel, in turn, shared stories of life on the ranch, the challenges of keeping livestock safe from rustlers and predators, the satisfaction of a successful roundup. It wasn't until full darkness had fallen that Gabriel realized how much time had passed. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across Adelaide's face. She looked exhausted, dark circles visible beneath her eyes. "You should rest," he said. "Your wagon train, do you know where they were planning to camp?" Adelaide's face fell. "I'm not entirely sure. We were following the river, but I walked for quite a while before I found the quicksand. They might have moved on by now, thinking I'd simply gone back to town." Gabriel frowned. "We'll sort it out in the morning. For tonight you can take my bedroll, I'll keep watch." "I can't take your bed," Adelaide protested. "You can and you will." Gabriel's tone left no room for argument. "You've been through an ordeal, you need proper rest." Too tired to fight, Adelaide accepted with a small nod. Gabriel showed her to his bedroll, then retreated to the other side of the fire with his saddle as a backrest. He'd spent plenty of nights sleeping upright or not sleeping at all. One more wouldn't hurt, but sleep proved elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Adelaide sinking into that quicksand, heard the terror in her voice. He thought about how close she'd come to dying, how easily the evening could have ended in tragedy. And he thought about the way she'd looked at him across the fire, like he was someone worth knowing. Gabriel had courted a few women over the years, though nothing had ever come of it. Ranch life didn't leave much time for socializing, and the women in San Antonio who caught his eye were usually already spoken for, or uninterested in the hard work that came with being a rancher's wife. He'd mostly resigned himself to bachelorhood, or at least told himself he had. But Adelaide Sterling, with her gray eyes and determined chin and stories of Boston society, had stirred something in him he'd thought long dormant. It was ridiculous, really. They'd known each other for a handful of hours. She was only passing through, on her way to a new life that had nothing to do with him. And yet, as he watched her sleep in the firelight, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that fate had put him in that exact spot at that exact moment for a reason. Morning came with the harsh call of a jay and the smell of smoke. Adelaide woke slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. Then memory returned in a rush: the quicksand, the rescue, Gabriel's kindness. She sat up and found him already awake, tending the fire with a practiced ease that spoke of years of experience. "Morning," he said, glancing over at her. "How are you feeling?" Adelaide took inventory of her body. Everything ached, particularly her legs and back, but it was the manageable sort of pain that came from overexertion rather than injury. "Sore but alive. Thank you again for don't mention it." Gabriel cut her off, but not unkindly. He handed her a tin plate with cornbread and some sort of preserved fruit. "Eat. Then we'll figure out what to do about your wagon train." They ate in companionable silence, watching as the sun climbed higher and burned away the morning mist. Gabriel's plan was to ride into San Antonio and make inquiries. If Adelaide's wagon train had reached town, someone would know about it. If they hadn't, well, they'd figure out the next step. "I should come with you," Adelaide said. "If they're looking for me, I should let them know I'm safe." Gabriel considered this. "All right, Copper can carry us both, but it won't be the most comfortable ride. I think I can manage discomfort at this point." Adelaide stood and brushed off the oversized trousers, "Though I don't suppose there's any salvaging my dress." Gabriel walked over to where she'd left it draped over a rock. The fabric was stiff with dried mud, and he shook his head. "Not without a proper washing, and even then it might be ruined. You'll have to wear my spare clothes into town." Adelaide laughed, a bright sound that made Gabriel's heart do something strange in his chest. "Won't that cause a scandal? Probably." He found himself grinning back at her. "But I have a feeling you're not too concerned with scandal, not anymore." She met his eyes, and that same electric current from the night before passed between them. Facing death has a way of putting social conventions in perspective. They broke camp efficiently, Gabriel handling most of the work while Adelaide rolled up the bedding and gathered the scattered cooking implements. Within an hour, they were ready to leave. Gabriel mounted Copper first, then reached down to help Adelaide up behind him. She hesitated for only a moment before accepting his hand, swinging up with surprising grace given her ordeal. "Hold on," Gabriel instructed, and Adelaide's arms wrapped around his waist. Even through his shirt, he could feel the warmth of her, the way she pressed against his back as Copper began to move. It was distracting in the best possible way. The ride to San Antonio took most of the morning. Gabriel kept Copper to a steady pace, mindful of his double burden. Adelaide didn't complain, though he could tell from the way she shifted occasionally that she was uncomfortable. They talked as they rode, Adelaide asking questions about the landscape and the wildlife, Gabriel playing the part of tour guide. He found himself enjoying her curiosity, the way she seemed genuinely interested in this harsh, beautiful country that was so different from anything she'd known. San Antonio appeared on the horizon as the sun approached its zenith. Even from a distance, Gabriel could see the increased activity in town. More wagons than usual, more people moving through the streets. Adelaide tensed behind him. "I think they're here," she said. "The wagon train, that's far more bustle than there should be for a Monday." She was right. As they rode into town, Gabriel could see the covered wagons arranged in a rough circle at the edge of the main plaza. People clustered in small groups, some talking animatedly, others looking worried. A few heads turned as Gabriel and Adelaide rode past, and he heard the murmur of voices rise in their wake. "Miss Sterling." A woman broke away from one of the groups and hurried toward them, her skirts kicking up dust. She was perhaps 50, with iron gray hair and a face creased with concern. "Thank the Lord, we've been searching everywhere for you." Gabriel dismounted and helped Adelaide down. She swayed slightly as her feet hit the ground, and he kept a steadying hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Mrs. Crawford," Adelaide greeted the woman. "I'm sorry to have caused such worry. I'm afraid I had a mishap yesterday evening." "A mishap?" Mrs. Crawford's eyes traveled over Adelaide's mud-stained appearance and ill-fitting clothes. "My dear girl, what happened?" Adelaide quickly recounted the story, though Gabriel noticed she downplayed the danger she'd been in. Mrs. Crawford's face grew paler with each word, and by the end she was clutching Adelaide's hand in both of hers. "You could have died," she breathed. "And this gentleman rescued you." Her gaze shifted to Gabriel, assessment in her eyes. "He did." Adelaide turned to look at him as well, and Gabriel felt the weight of both women's attention. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Gabriel Anderson. Gabriel, Mrs. Crawford was kind enough to allow me to travel with her family on the wagon train." "Mr. Anderson." Mrs. Crawford extended her hand and Gabriel shook it. "We are in your debt. Adelaide has become dear to us during our journey." "I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time," Gabriel said, echoing his words from the night before. He felt awkward under such gratitude, uncertain how to respond. More people were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Adelaide found herself surrounded by the families from the wagon train, all expressing relief at her safe return and horror at her near-death experience. Gabriel started to step back, to give her space and remove himself from the center of attention, but Adelaide's hand shot out and caught his sleeve. "Don't go," she said quietly, and there was something in her eyes that kept him rooted to the spot. The next hour passed in a blur of explanations and reassurances. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Dutch Keller, questioned Gabriel extensively about the location of the quicksand, muttering about how he should have warned people more carefully about the dangers of wandering near the river. Mrs. Crawford fussed over Adelaide like a mother hen, insisting she needed proper rest and a decent meal. Someone produced a dress for Adelaide to change into, though she seemed reluctant to give back Gabriel's clothes. Throughout it all, Gabriel found his eyes drawn back to Adelaide. She handled the attention with grace, thanking everyone for their concern while also maintaining a certain dignity despite her disheveled state. She was, he realized, exactly the sort of woman who could thrive in this harsh country. She had the resilience for it, the strength beneath the refined exterior. Eventually, the crowd dispersed, returning to their own concerns and preparations. The wagon train would be staying in San Antonio for a few days to resupply before continuing their journey, and Adelaide would be staying with the Crawfords at a local boarding house. Gabriel knew this was his cue to leave, to return to his own life and let Adelaide get on with hers. But he found himself lingering, helping to unload supplies from one of the wagons while Adelaide changed into the borrowed dress. When she emerged from behind the wagon, Gabriel's breath caught. The dress was simple calico, nothing fancy, but it fit her properly and the blue color brought out the gray of her eyes. She'd managed to tame her hair into a loose braid over one shoulder, and though she still looked tired, there was a vitality to her that hadn't been there the night before. "Better?" she asked, noticing his stare. "Better," Gabriel agreed. He cleared his throat. "I should probably head out. Got to get back to the ranch eventually." Adelaide's face fell just slightly before she schooled her expression back to neutrality. "Of course. You've already given up so much of your time for me." They stood there, neither quite willing to say goodbye. Gabriel shifted his weight from foot to foot, his hat in his hands. This was ridiculous. He was a grown man, not some lovesick boy. But the thought of riding away and never seeing Adelaide Sterling again sat in his chest like a stone. "Listen," he said finally. "I know you've got your own plans, teaching and all that, but if you ever need anything while you're in San Antonio, the Broken is only a few hours' ride. Anyone in town can give you directions." Adelaide stepped closer, and Gabriel caught the faint scent of lavender that somehow clung to her despite everything. "I'd like that," she said. "To visit, I mean, if the invitation is genuine." "It is." Gabriel's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Very genuine." "Then I'll take you up on it," she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "After all, I should properly meet the family of the man who saved my life." They parted ways with promises to see each other soon, though Gabriel had no idea if Adelaide truly meant it or if she was simply being polite. He mounted Copper and rode out of San Antonio, looking back only once to see Adelaide standing in the plaza, watching him go. She raised her hand in a small wave, and Gabriel returned it before forcing himself to turn forward and focus on the road ahead. The ride back to the Broken gave Gabriel plenty of time to think. He kept replaying the past 24 hours in his mind, analyzing every conversation, every look, every touch. Was he reading too much into Adelaide's friendliness? She'd been through a trauma and he'd helped her. Of course she was grateful. That didn't mean she felt anything deeper. But then he'd remember the way she'd held on to him during the ride to town, the way she'd asked him not to go, the warmth in her smile when she'd promised to visit. Those weren't just the actions of someone being polite, were they? Gabriel was so lost in thought that he almost missed the turnoff to the ranch. He corrected Copper's course at the last moment, following the familiar path through the gate marked with the broken brand. The ranch house came into view, a sprawling adobe structure that his grandfather had built 40 years ago. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant his mother was cooking. As Gabriel dismounted in front of the stable, his youngest brother Thomas came running out, all gangly limbs and enthusiasm. At 14, Thomas was still more boy than man, though he tried hard to prove otherwise. "Gabriel, you're back." Thomas grabbed Copper's reins. "How was Corpus Christi? Did you get a good price? Marcus said you probably got swindled, but I told him you're too smart for that." "Tell Marcus I got better than a good price." Gabriel unsaddled Copper and gave the horse a grateful pat, "and that he owes me $1 for doubting. I'm not paying you anything." Marcus appeared in the stable doorway, 25 years old and the spitting image of their father. He had the same dark hair and broad shoulders, the same way of standing like he owned whatever ground he was on. "Not until I see the money. It's in my saddlebag." Gabriel tossed the bag to his brother. "Count it yourself if you don't believe me." While Marcus rummaged through the bag, Gabriel gave Copper a thorough rub-down and made sure he had fresh water and feed. Thomas peppered him with questions about the journey, most of which Gabriel answered with half his attention. The other half was still in San Antonio, with a gray-eyed woman in an oversized shirt. "Something happened on the trip?" Marcus asked, studying Gabriel with the too knowing gaze of someone who'd spent his whole life reading his brother's moods. "You seem distracted." "Nothing worth mentioning." Gabriel hung up the saddle and brushed past Marcus, heading for the house. He could feel his brother's eyes on his back, but Marcus, thankfully, didn't push. Their mother, Adelaide Anderson, was indeed in the kitchen when Gabriel entered. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had a presence that made her seem much larger. Her hair, still more black than gray, was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark eyes missed nothing. "My Hijo," she said, turning from the stove to embrace him. "You're home. Good. And you made good money on the cattle, yes?" "I did, Mama." Gabriel returned the embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of corn and chili peppers. "Everything all right here, the same as always. Work, work, and more work." But there was satisfaction in her voice. Adelaide Anderson had never been afraid of hard work. She'd come to Texas from Mexico as a young bride, and she'd helped build the broken from nothing into one of the most successful ranches in the area. "You look tired and thin. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Mama." Gabriel accepted the bowl of stew she pressed into his hands and sat at the worn kitchen table. His younger brother James was already there, reading a newspaper and occasionally calling out interesting snippets to whoever would listen. At 19, James was the scholar of the family, always with his nose in a book when he should have been working cattle. "Says here they're building a new schoolhouse in San Antonio," James announced. "Going to be the biggest in South Texas. They're hiring teachers from back east." Gabriel's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Does it say anything about the teachers?" James scanned the article. "Just that they're expected to arrive within the month. Why?" "No reason." Gabriel focused on his stew, but he could feel his mother's eyes on him again. The next few days fell into the familiar rhythm of ranch life. Gabriel threw himself into work, helping to repair fences, check on the cattle, break a new horse that Marcus had acquired from a passing trader. But his mind kept wandering back to Adelaide, wondering if she'd settled in, if she'd found a teaching position, if she ever thought about him the way he found himself thinking about her. On the fourth day after his return, Gabriel was working on replacing a section of the corral fence when Thomas came running up, waving something in his hand. "Gabriel, someone left this at the gate for you." He thrust a folded piece of paper at his brother. Gabriel wiped his hands on his trousers before accepting the note. His name was written on the outside in elegant script that made his heart skip. He opened it carefully, aware of Thomas watching with undisguised curiosity. The message was brief. "Thank you again for your kindness. I've secured a position at the new schoolhouse and will be staying in San Antonio indefinitely. If your invitation still stands, I would be honored to visit the Broken this Sunday. Adelaide Sterling." Gabriel read it twice, then folded it and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Who's Adelaide Sterling?" Thomas demanded. "A friend." Gabriel picked up his hammer, fighting to keep the smile off his face. "A lady friend." Thomas's eyes lit up with mischief. "Gabriel's got a lady friend." "Go make yourself useful somewhere else," Gabriel suggested, but there was no heat in it. Thomas ran off, no doubt to spread the news to the rest of the family. Gabriel didn't care. He had 3 days to prepare for Adelaide's visit, 3 days to figure out what he was going to say to her, 3 days to convince himself that this wasn't just gratitude on her part. Sunday arrived with cloudless skies and temperatures that promised to climb uncomfortably high by afternoon. Gabriel was up before dawn, doing every chore he could think of and a few he invented just to keep his hands busy. He cleaned out the stable until it shone, groomed Copper and the other horses, organized the tack room, and was considering whitewashing the fence posts when Marcus finally intervened. "You're going to work yourself to death before she even gets here," his brother said, physically removing the brush from Gabriel's hand. "Go clean yourself up. Put on a decent shirt. Stop acting like a nervous schoolboy." "I'm not nervous," Gabriel protested, but even he could hear the lie in his voice. Marcus laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "Brother, I haven't seen you this twisted up since you tried to court the Miller girl when you were 17. Just be yourself. If she's coming all the way out here, she obviously wants to see you." Gabriel took his brother's advice, retreating to the house to wash up and change into his good shirt, the dark blue one his mother had made him for church. He was attempting to tame his hair when he heard the sound of a horse approaching. His stomach did a nervous flip. Adelaide arrived in a small buggy driven by a man Gabriel recognized as one of the livery owners in San Antonio. She wore a dress of pale green that made her look fresh and cool despite the heat, and her hair was pinned up in a style that showed off the graceful line of her neck. When she saw Gabriel waiting on the porch, her face broke into a smile that made all his nervous energy worthwhile. "Miss Sterling," Gabriel greeted her, helping her down from the buggy. "Welcome to the Broken. Thank you for having me." Adelaide's hand lingered in his for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "And please call me Adelaide. I think we're past formalities, don't you? Adelaide." Her name felt right in his mouth. "Then you should call me Gabriel." The buggy driver, having been paid, tipped his hat and drove off, promising to return before sunset. Gabriel suddenly realized they were alone, or as alone as they could be with his entire family undoubtedly watching from various windows. He could practically feel his mother's eyes boring into his back. "Would you like to see the ranch?" Gabriel offered. "It's not much, but it's home." "I'd love to." Gabriel showed Adelaide around, narrating the history of the buildings and pointing out landmarks. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions about the cattle operation and the challenges of ranch life. They walked to the north pasture where some of the herd grazed, and Adelaide laughed with delight when a curious calf approached to investigate her skirts. "He's beautiful," she said, running her hand along the calf's soft nose. "I've never been this close to cattle before." "Never." Gabriel was amused by her wonder. "What did you think beef came from?" "I knew where it came from, I just never thought much about the process." Adelaide straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt unselfconsciously. "Everything here is so different from Boston, so much more real somehow." "Does that make sense?" "It does." Gabriel leaned against the fence, studying her profile as she watched the cattle. "Are you happy with your decision to come west?" Adelaide turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "I am. It's harder than I expected, and sometimes I'm homesick for things I didn't even know I'd miss. But I feel like I'm actually living now instead of just existing. Does that sound melodramatic?" "No." Gabriel's voice was quiet. "It sounds honest." Their eyes met and held. The air between them felt charged, full of possibility. Gabriel wanted to reach out to touch her hand or tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but he held himself back. Too soon, his mind cautioned, even as his heart argued otherwise. The moment was broken by Thomas's voice calling from the house. "Gabriel, Mama says to bring your guest in for lunch." Adelaide laughed, the spell dissipating. "I suppose we shouldn't keep your mother waiting." Lunch with the Anderson family was a lively affair. Elena had outdone herself, preparing tamales and fresh tortillas, beans cooked with chunks of pork, and a salad of vegetables from her garden. Adelaide was seated at Gabriel's right, and she charmed the entire family with her questions about their lives and her stories about Boston. Even Marcus, usually quiet around strangers, found himself laughing at her description of a disastrous society ball where the orchestra had played all the wrong songs. "So you're the teacher from the note," Thomas said around a mouthful of tamale. "Are you going to be teaching at the new school?" "I am," Adelaide nodded. "I'll be working with children aged 6 to 12. We start next month." "That's going to be a lot of work," Elena observed, but there was approval in her eyes. "Teaching is important. My boys, they all know how to read and write because I made sure of it." "Your boys are lucky to have you." Adelaide's voice was sincere. "Not every mother prioritizes education, especially out here where there's so much other work to do." "Knowledge is never wasted," Elena said firmly. "Even if you spend your life ranching, you need to know how to read contracts, how to do numbers, how to write letters. Gabriel, he handles all our business dealings now because he learned his letters young." Gabriel felt his face heat under his mother's praise and Adelaide's interested gaze. "Mama, I'm sure Adelaide doesn't want to hear I do actually." Adelaide interrupted, leaning forward. "I'd love to hear more about how you manage the business side of the ranch. It's fascinating." So Gabriel found himself explaining the intricacies of cattle trading, land management, and the delicate dance of negotiating prices with buyers who always wanted to pay less than the cattle were worth. Adelaide listened intently, asking smart questions that showed she understood the economics even if she didn't know the specific terminology. After lunch, Gabriel offered to show Adelaide the rest of the property. They walked in companionable silence toward the old mission ruins that marked the eastern boundary of Anderson land. The ruins dated back over 100 years, from when Spanish missionaries had first come to the area. Gabriel had played in them as a child, imagining battles and adventures among the crumbling adobe walls. "It's beautiful here," Adelaide said, running her hand along one of the still-standing archways. "Sad but beautiful. My father used to bring me here when I was young," Gabriel said. "He'd tell me stories about the people who built this place, about the dreams they had for this land. He said we were continuing their work in a way, building something that would last. Is that what you want? Adelaide asked. To build something that lasts, Gabriel considered the question. I think so. I want to take the broken and make it stronger, more prosperous. I want to build a legacy for my own children someday. He paused, suddenly aware of how presumptuous that sounded. If I have children, I mean, that's the hope anyway. Adelaide was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, I think you'll be a good father. You're patient and kind. Those are important qualities. You think so? Gabriel asked, then immediately felt foolish for needing her validation. I know so. Adelaide turned to face him fully. Gabriel, I should tell you something. When I decided to come to Texas, I told myself I was looking for independence, for a chance to make my own way, and that's true. But I was also running from something. What were you running from? Expectations. Marriage proposals from men I didn't love, couldn't love. My mother's plans for me to marry well and produce heirs and live a life that would have suffocated me. She took a shaky breath. I know I've only been here a short time and I barely know you, but I feel more myself in your presence than I ever did in Boston society. Is that strange? Gabriel's heart was pounding so hard he was certain Adelaide could hear it. It's not strange. I feel the same way. From the moment I saw you in that quicksand, fighting to survive, I just knew. You were someone I wanted to know. Someone I needed to know. Gabriel. His name was barely a whisper on her lips. He closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Adelaide didn't move, didn't retreat. Instead, she tilted her face up to his, her gray eyes dark with an emotion that matched what was coursing through his own veins. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Adelaide's hands came up to grip his shoulders and she pressed closer, Gabriel deepened the kiss, pouring all his pent-up longing into it. She tasted like sunshine and possibility, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gabriel knew his life had just changed irrevocably. I should probably apologize, he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. That was forward of me. Adelaide laughed, breathless. Don't you dare apologize. I've been hoping you'd do that since the moment I saw you standing on the porch. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. Gabriel's hands settled on Adelaide's waist, feeling the warmth of her through the thin fabric of her dress. This woman, this incredible, brave, beautiful woman, wanted him. The realization was intoxicating. Eventually, they forced themselves to separate, mindful that Gabriel's family was probably watching from the house and drawing their own conclusions. They walked back hand in hand, and Gabriel marveled at how natural it felt, how right. The rest of Adelaide's visit passed in a blur of conversation and stolen glances. When the buggy returned at sunset to take her back to San Antonio, Gabriel helped her up and then held her hand through the window. Can I see you again? He asked. Soon. You'd better, Adelaide replied with a smile. I don't think I could stand it if you didn't. Next Sunday. She squeezed his hand. And Gabriel, thank you for everything. Don't wander off again, he said with a grin, echoing his words from that first day, though the context was entirely different now. Adelaide laughed. I'll try my best, though I have to say, wandering off that day was the best mistake I ever made. Gabriel watched the buggy until it disappeared from sight, then turned to find his entire family assembled on the porch, varying degrees of smugness on their faces. So, Marcus said, arms crossed. When's the wedding? Shut up, Gabriel replied, but he was smiling. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Every Sunday, Adelaide would visit the Broken A, and every Sunday, Gabriel would find himself more deeply in love. They talked for hours, discovering shared values and complementary differences. Adelaide was more book-smart, Gabriel more practical, but they challenged each other in ways that felt like growth rather than conflict. Gabriel began making trips into San Antonio during the week as well, timing his visits to coincide with Adelaide's lunch breaks from the schoolhouse. They'd walk together through the town plaza, sometimes stopping for lemonade at the general store, always drawing smiles from the locals who had quickly figured out that Gabriel Anderson was courting the new teacher. One afternoon in late September, as they sat together on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, Adelaide said, "Tell me about the quicksand again." Gabriel looked at her quizzically. "You were there. You know what happened." "I know what I experienced," Adelaide clarified. "But I want to know what you were thinking. You saw a stranger in danger and you just ran toward it without hesitation. Why?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment, trying to articulate something he'd never really put into words. "I guess because it was the right thing to do. My father always said that a man's character is defined by what he does when no one's watching. And even though you were a stranger, you were a person in need. How could I not help?" Adelaide's eyes shone with unshed tears. "You know how rare that is. Most people talk about doing the right thing, but when it comes down to it, they choose comfort or safety. You chose me, a complete stranger, and you risked your life to save mine. I'd do it again." Gabriel took her hand, lacing their fingers together. 100 times over. "Though I'd prefer if you stayed away from Quicksand in the future. I'll do my best." Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her tone made Gabriel tense. "All right." "I received a letter from my father's lawyer in Boston. The estate has been fully settled and I've inherited everything. The house, the investments, all of it." She paused. "I'm a wealthy woman, Gabriel, very wealthy, and I need to know that you're with me for me, not for my money." Gabriel's first reaction was surprise, quickly followed by something like offense. "Adelaide, I didn't even know you had money. When I pulled you out of that quicksand, I wasn't thinking about your bank account. I was thinking about saving your life. I know." Adelaide sat up, turning to face him. "I'm sorry that came out wrong. I don't actually doubt your motivations, but I've learned to be cautious. There were men in Boston who courted me solely because of my inheritance. I just needed to be honest with you about my situation." "I appreciate the honesty." Gabriel squeezed her hand. "But Adelaide, I don't need your money. The broken is doing well and I make a good living. I want you for your intelligence and your courage and the way you make me laugh. For the way you look at the world like everything's an adventure waiting to happen. Even the quicksand." Adelaide asked with a watery smile, "Especially the quicksand." Gabriel cupped her face in his hands. "That's where I found you. How could I ever regret that?" They kissed, heedless of the people passing by in the plaza. When they pulled apart, Adelaide was smiling through her tears. "I love you," she said. "I know it's fast and maybe I shouldn't say it, but I do. I love you, Gabriel Anderson. I love you too." The words came easily, naturally. "From the moment I saw you fighting to survive in that sand, I think I was already half in love. Every moment since has just confirmed what I knew from the start." "So what do we do now?" Adelaide asked. Gabriel took a deep breath, his heart racing. He hadn't planned this, hadn't prepared any sort of speech, but suddenly he knew exactly what he wanted. "Marry me." Adelaide's eyes went wide. "What? Marry me?" Gabriel repeated, more firmly this time. "I know we haven't been courting long by conventional standards, but I don't care about conventions. I know what I want, and I want you. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me. I want to build a life together, to face whatever challenges come our way as a team. I want children with your eyes and your determination. I want to grow old watching you teach generations of kids to read and write. I want all of it, Adelaide, if you'll have me." For a long moment, Adelaide just stared at him, and Gabriel felt panic begin to creep in. Had he misread the situation? Moved too fast? But then Adelaide launched herself at him, nearly knocking him off the bench as she threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 6 weeks later, on a crisp November afternoon in 1878, in the small church in San Antonio. Adelaide wore a simple white dress that she'd sewn herself with help from Alina, who had embraced her future daughter-in-law with enthusiasm. The ceremony was attended by Gabriel's entire family, several neighbors, Adelaide's fellow teachers, and what seemed like half the town. Dutch Keller gave Adelaide away, having formed a fatherly attachment to her during the wagon train journey. Mrs. Crawford cried through the entire ceremony. Thomas served as Gabriel's best man, despite being the youngest brother, a choice that had made the boy swell with pride. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Gabriel kissed his bride, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers. Adelaide pulled back from the kiss with a radiant smile. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Gabriel agreed, kissing her again for good measure. The reception was held at the Broken A, with tables set up in the yard and more food than Gabriel had ever seen in one place. Alina had spent days cooking, aided by neighbors who'd contributed their own specialties. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Gabriel danced with his bride beneath the stars, holding her close and marveling at his good fortune. "Happy," he murmured into her hair, deliriously so. Adelaide pulled back to look at him. "Though I still can't believe this is real sometimes. 6 months ago, I was in Boston, miserable and suffocating. Now I'm married to the man I love, about to start a whole new life. It's almost too much happiness for one person." "Get used to it," Gabriel said. "I plan to make you this happy every day for the rest of our lives." "That's a tall order, Mr. Anderson." "I'm up for the challenge, Mrs. Anderson." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Adelaide continued teaching at the schoolhouse, and Gabriel continued running the ranch with his brothers. They lived in a small house on the property that Gabriel and Marcus had built together, just far enough from the main house to provide privacy, but close enough to remain part of the family compound. Winter came and went. Then spring arrived with its promise of new beginnings. Adelaide flourished in her role as teacher, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. She'd brought books from Boston, and in the evenings, she would read aloud to Gabriel while he worked on leather or mended tack. Sometimes Gabriel would read to her, stumbling over the more complex words but improving with practice. On a warm evening in May, Adelaide set down her book and placed her hand over her stomach, a mysterious smile on her face. "Gabriel, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the bridle he was repairing. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." She said it simply, but her eyes shone with joy. "We're going to have a baby." Gabriel dropped the bridle and crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling Adelaide into his arms. "Are you sure?" "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait until I was certain before I told you." She laughed as Gabriel spun her around. "Careful, you'll make me dizzy." "I'm going to be a father," Gabriel said, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents. Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, though the answer was obvious from his expression. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Gabriel set her down gently and dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there. This is your papa. I can't wait to meet you." Adelaide ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This life, this beautiful, unexpected life, was hers. All because she'd wandered off into dangerous territory and a good man had been there to save her. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Adelaide had to stop teaching in her 7th month when the heat and her growing belly made the work too exhausting. She spent her days helping Alina with lighter chores around the ranch and preparing the nursery in their little house. Gabriel was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly worrying that Adelaide was doing too much or not resting enough. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she'd remind him with fond exasperation whenever he tried to carry something for her or insisted she sit down. "I know, but I can't help it." Gabriel would kiss her forehead and continue hovering anyway. On a January morning in 1880, Adelaide went into labor. Alina and a midwife from town took over, banishing Gabriel and his brothers from the house. Gabriel paced outside for hours, wearing a path in the dirt while Marcus attempted to distract him with work, and Thomas made jokes that fell flat. When the midwife finally emerged and announced that he had a healthy son, Gabriel nearly fainted with relief. He was ushered inside to find Adelaide propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly as Gabriel approached. He looked down at the infant's wrinkled face, the tiny fists, the eyes that were trying to focus on the world around him, and felt his entire universe shift. "He's perfect. We're calling him Samuel." Adelaide had been firm about this. "After my father, Samuel Gabriel Anderson, Samuel." Gabriel reached out tentatively to touch his son's hand, marveling when the tiny fingers wrapped around his much larger one. "Welcome to the family, son." Samuel was a good baby, all things considered. He slept reasonably well and nursed enthusiastically. Adelaide took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, though she confessed to Gabriel in the quiet hours of the night that she sometimes felt overwhelmed. "I keep thinking I'm going to do something wrong," she admitted, Samuel asleep in the cradle beside their bed. "That I'm not good enough for this." "You're perfect," Gabriel assured her, pulling her close. "Look at him, Adelaide. He's healthy and happy and so obviously loved. You're doing everything right." As Samuel grew, he revealed himself to be a curious, active child with his mother's gray eyes and his father's stubborn streak. By the time he was 2, he was following Gabriel around the ranch, insisting on helping with chores in ways that usually made more work rather than less. Gabriel didn't mind. He loved having his son with him, loved teaching him about the land and the animals, loved seeing the world through fresh eyes. Adelaide returned to teaching when Samuel was 3, though only part-time. Alina doted on her grandson and was happy to watch him during the mornings. The arrangement worked well for everyone involved. Years passed in the pleasant rhythm of family life. Samuel was joined by a daughter, Emma, in 1883, and then another son, David, in 1886. The little house grew crowded, and Gabriel and Marcus built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Adelaide's influence was evident in every corner: books on shelves, curtains at the windows, photographs in frames documenting the growing family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gabriel took Adelaide back to the spot where he'd pulled her from the quicksand. The area had changed somewhat. The river had shifted its course, and the dangerous pocket of sand was now solid ground, covered with scrub brush. "I can't believe it's been 10 years, Adelaide said, standing at the place that had nearly been her grave. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, other times it feels like a lifetime ago. A lot has happened in 10 years. Gabriel wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "3 children. The ranch has grown. You've taught hundreds of students. We built a life together, the best life." Adelaide leaned back against him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been here that day? If you'd been somewhere else, or if I'd wandered in a different direction?" I try not to think about it, Gabriel admitted. It's too terrifying to imagine a world where I never met you. But you did meet me. Adelaide turned in his arms to face him. You saved me, Gabriel, not just from the quicksand, but from a life that would have been half-lived. You gave me everything I didn't know I was looking for. You saved me too, Gabriel said. I was just going through the motions before you came along. Working the ranch, getting older but not really living. You brought color into my world. They kissed, a long, sweet kiss that held a decade's worth of love and commitment. When they pulled apart, Adelaide smiled. Let's go home, she said. Our children are probably driving your mother crazy by now. Our children are angels, Gabriel protested. Our children are terrors, and you know it. But Adelaide's voice was full of affection. They get it from you. Me, I was a perfect child. That's not what Alina says. They walked back to their horses, hand in hand, arguing good-naturedly about which side of the family was responsible for Samuel's tendency to get into mischief, and Emma's stubborn insistence on doing everything herself. It was a familiar, comfortable argument, one they'd had countless times before and would have countless times again. Life continued its steady march forward. Samuel grew into a serious boy who loved working with the horses. Emma developed a passion for reading that rivaled her mother's, and she could often be found curled up with a book when she should have been doing chores. David, the baby, was surprisingly gentle for a ranch child, preferring to help his grandmother in the garden rather than chase after cattle. Gabriel watched his children grow with a mixture of pride and melancholy. They were becoming their own people, developing interests and personalities distinct from their parents. It was wonderful and sad all at once, this slow process of letting go. They're going to leave us someday, he said to Adelaide one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. Of course they will. Adelaide reached for his hand. That's what children do. We raise them to be independent, to go out into the world and make their own way. It's the natural order of things. I know, doesn't mean I have to like it. We'll still have each other. Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder. That's what matters. We started with just the two of us, remember? We'll end with just the two of us. Full circle. Not for a long time yet, Gabriel said firmly. We have years and years ahead of us. And they did. The children grew into adults, each following their own path. Samuel took over management of the broken, when Gabriel's arthritis made the physical work difficult, proving himself to be a capable and innovative rancher. Emma became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over Adelaide's position at the schoolhouse. David surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for law, studying under a lawyer in San Antonio before opening his own practice. Gabriel and Adelaide grew old together, their hair going gray and then white, their faces etching with lines that told the story of a life well lived. They remained active in the community, respected as pillars of San Antonio society. People would point them out to newcomers. That's Gabriel and Adelaide Anderson. He saved her from quicksand 40 years ago, and they've been together ever since. The story had taken on a legendary quality over the years, growing with each retelling. Some versions had the quicksand 50 yards across instead of 6 feet. Some had Gabriel carrying Adelaide for miles instead of 40 yards. But the core remained the same. A man who'd risked everything to save a stranger, and the love that had bloomed from that moment of courage. On a spring morning in 1923, Gabriel woke to find Adelaide still sleeping beside him, her breathing shallow and labored. He knew, even before the doctor arrived, that her time was short. Adelaide had been ill for months, her heart slowly failing despite the best medical care available. Their children gathered at the bedside, along with their spouses and grandchildren. Adelaide, pale but peaceful, looked at each of them in turn, whispering words of love and advice. Then she reached for Gabriel's hand. "Come closer," she said, her voice barely audible. Gabriel leaned in, his own eyes wet with tears he refused to let fall. Not yet. He had to be strong for her. "Remember what you said to me." Adelaide's lips curved in a small smile. "After you carried me out of the quicksand, you set me down and you said, 'Don't wander off again.' I remember." Gabriel's voice broke. "Well, I'm about to wander off again." Adelaide squeezed his hand weakly. "And this time you can't come with me. Not yet." "Adelaide, listen." Her gray eyes, faded but still clear, held his. "You gave me 45 years of happiness, Gabriel. You gave me a life I never could have imagined. You gave me children and grandchildren and love beyond measure. Thank you. For everything. For saving me, for loving me, for being exactly who you are." "I love you," Gabriel managed. "I'll always love you, I know, and I'll be waiting for you when it's your time. We'll find each other again, just like we found each other that day by the river." Adelaide's eyes drifted closed. "But until then, you live, you hear me? You spend time with your family, you watch the sunsets. You remember that life is precious and beautiful even when it's hard." "I will." Gabriel pressed his lips to her forehead. "I promise." Adelaide took one more breath, let it out slowly, and was still. The room erupted in quiet sobs, but Gabriel just sat there, holding her hand, memorizing the feel of it in his. 45 years hadn't been enough. A lifetime hadn't been enough. He wanted more time, more conversations, more sunsets on the porch, more of everything that made up a life together. But Adelaide was right. Life was precious, even in its ending, especially in its ending. Gabriel lived for another 7 years after Adelaide's death, surrounded by family, remaining active in his children's and grandchildren's lives. He told them stories about their grandmother, about Boston and Quicksand and the wagon train, about building their house and watching the ranch grow, about every precious moment of their life together. On a summer evening in 1930, with Samuel sitting beside him on the porch of the house he'd built with his own hands, Gabriel felt a strange peace settle over him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and red. It reminded him of that first sunset with Adelaide when they'd sat by his campfire and talked until the stars came out. "Dad," Samuel's voice was concerned. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, son," Gabriel smiled. "I'm more than fine, I'm ready." He closed his eyes and saw Adelaide standing in the mission ruins, young and vibrant, waiting for him with that smile that had captured his heart from the beginning. He heard her voice clear as a bell. "Don't wander off again." "I won't," Gabriel whispered. "Not this time. We'll stay together." Samuel found him an hour later, still sitting in his chair, peaceful in death as he'd been in life. At the funeral, the entire town turned out to pay their respects to Gabriel Anderson, rancher, family man, and the hero of one of San Antonio's most enduring love stories. They buried him next to Adelaide under a sprawling oak tree in the town cemetery. The headstone was simple. Gabriel Anderson, 1852–1930. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he saved her from the quicksand and she saved him right back. Years later, decades later, when San Antonio had grown from a rough frontier town into a modern city, people would still visit the grave. They'd stand there and read the inscription, and someone would inevitably tell the story about the cowboy who carried a woman across 40 yards of quicksand, set her down and said, "Don't wander off again." About how those words had been the beginning of a love that lasted a lifetime. And somewhere, if you believed in such things, Gabriel and Adelaide were together still, walking hand in hand across golden prairies that never ended, their love as strong in death as it had been in life, proof that some things truly do last forever.